Good afternoon to all our participants today on Thursday in May. Nice spring going on in Europe. My name is Tia Laukkola. I'm the Director for Institutional Development at EUA, and it is my pleasure to be facilitating today's webinar where we are going to talk about internal quality assurance and how the COVID-19 crisis has impacted it. What if it has? That is the question. So we all know the huge changes that have been taking place in a year and so in our universities across Europe and across globe, actually. And at EUA, we've been asking how's that impacted how we do internal quality assurance in our universities. And we've done a little exercise in looking into it. And today we hope to discuss it with all of you and to see what are the lessons learned at this stage, although we are in the middle of the crisis or the pandemic, of course, still. So a couple of practicalities before we go to the actual topic. So there is a chat box where that you can see on the right side of your screen. Please do make many greetings, make any report any technical issues in that one, or other remarks or greetings, as many of you often do. But we would ask you to please group your questions to the speakers to the Q&A tab. And in that tab, you can also vote for the questions that your fellow participants have made, and then we will be picking them up in the discussion part of the webinar. So please ask questions and vote for the questions that you think are the most pertinent. We will also be picking your brain a little bit during this hour and posing some polls to you, so please answer our questions. And then in the handout section, you will be able to find some interesting publications that are being referred to, I would assume, by the speakers in the next hour. And one more practicality, which is that we are recording this session, and it will be posted on EUA's YouTube channel afterwards. All those who are participating in this event will receive an email from us afterwards, and there will be a link included. So you can share it with your colleagues or even look at yourself again if you think you missed something in this hour. So those are the key practicalities. Then who do we have here with me today? We have Frank Niedermayer, Head of the Department for Higher Education Studies, Center for Quality Development at the University of Potsdam, Germany. We have Aisling McKenna, Director of Quality Promotion and Institutional Research from the Dublin City University in Ireland. They will be telling how their universities have dealt with the past year in terms of internal quality assurance. And then my colleague Elena Kirlan, a Policy and Project Officer, who will be explaining a little bit of what we have found out about this topic at EUA. So that's the lineup. I think we have an exciting hour ahead of us. So let's start by picking your brain, as I promised. So we have the very first poll for you to answer. Has your institution adapted its internal quality assurance during the COVID-19 crisis? Please answer the question and submit your answer. And then you will be able to find the poll once we close it. If you look at on the right side of your screen, you can see the tab called Polls, and then go to the closed tab. It looks like there are still a couple of answers coming in. Now it's stopped, so I would ask my colleagues behind the scenes to close the poll so that all the participants can also see the answer. So 32% of you say that you have adapted your internal quality assurance, and 44% says you have adapted it somewhat. Then I would assume that the not applicable 14% means that we also have some people who are not working in the universities. So something has been happening in the internal quality assurance. So I would say that this makes our webinar timely to look at what we've been doing. So I will give the floor now to Frank to start with the University of Potsdam perspective. What have you been up to in the past year?
Thank you very much, Tia, for the introduction, and thank you for organizing the focus group and inviting me here today for my quick presentation on what we have been doing here in Potsdam, our experiences. As you see, I called my little input from emergency to change, and I'm trying really to focus on quality assurance of teaching and learning, and how we reacted and where we will be going in the future. Just to introduce you, University of Potsdam very quickly, we are a quite young university, just founded after German unification in 1991. And we are the largest university in the state of Brandenburg, which is around Berlin, our capital. We have 7 faculties with 2 very new faculties, the digital engineering faculty and the faculty of health sciences, and 3 locations with about 22,000 students, of which 13–14% about our international students. And here you can see our 3 campuses, one historical and one more modern, and one which is also kind of historical, a bit more nearby Berlin. Our quality assurance is, we always call it, organized in a decentral way. As you can see here on the right top, the Center for Quality Development is a central unit under the Vice President for Teaching and Studies, and we have 3 departments: the Higher Education Studies Department, where I'm coming from, the Career Service and University College, and the Teaching and Media. So these 3 departments are all looking at different quality assurance aspects, I would say. Higher Education Studies more on the classical evaluation and accreditation and the quality management system as a whole. The Career Service and University College is supporting more the side of the students, and the Teaching and Media department, my colleagues there are supporting the teachers, lecturers, and professors. And you can see that every faculty has a quality manager and a dean of studies, so they have their own structures and their own also framework and policies, for example, on how to assure the quality of teaching and learning in their faculties. So what was the situation right before the famous pandemic? We have been just re-accredited our system, so we are institutionally accredited in Germany. We were just in the midst of finishing our process for a mission statement of teaching and learning, which has been then adopted in the very first Senate's online meeting on April 15th. We had just quite newly introduced grants for innovative teaching approaches, and we are currently growing quite fast with, as I told you earlier, new faculties, but also our teacher training student numbers are expected to rise in the next years. Coming to e-learning and digital learning, we had already an e-learning strategy in place. But here, very clearly, we state also that we are a presence university. And in a way, we saw, before pandemic, we saw e-learning as an enrichment, and it was very diverse in its use in the faculties. But we had quite well-established, or very well-established supports and trainings in e-teaching, for example. So a lot of experience there, and also platforms, etc., like most universities had. When it comes to teacher support and student support, the colleagues have, I think, reacted quite quickly with introductory workshops online. We quite quickly had to buy a Zoom license. So there was, for example, classical introductions to Zoom, but also to Moodle, so more the technical side. This was at the very beginning. And with time, more and more of these offers and support has been growing and going more into the direction of, for example, student engagement. So more on didactical questions, media creation, how do I do a slide cast, etc. And also very interesting for most of our teachers and lecturers was the question of copyright. So with time, more and more of these online offers have been built, the website has been built, and also I think a very important point on how we managed to go through this pandemic is the support by e-assistants, so trained student assistants. It was about, I think, 20 we trained who supported individual lecturers. With time, I think after the summer semester last year, the focus also began to be more on the student side, with offers on digital learning. How do I organize myself? How is digital study best organized? What tools are there? There were workshops organized by so-called student experts for other students, and socializing and exchange events. And I think here there is still room for improvement, and also maybe the question on how to attract more students for these. Coming to our evaluation, we were quite quick, I would say, in offering a new tool for the evaluation of on course level. So we introduced Feedback UP in April 2020, just shortly after our semester started. And it's a formative way, meaning that you can use the survey, the online survey, multiple times during the lecture time to get feedback on the one hand, especially more on the expectation side, and then more on the implementation side later on. We had then also multiple short surveys. Here you see it, the pot split surveys, we call them, for lecturers and students to really gain more insight about the black box of online teaching. We didn't really know what is happening, what are our teachers and lecturers doing, how are the students feeling, etc. So we had multiple times in the summer and then also winter semester these kind of short surveys, which informed our different exchange groups and committees in how to go on with navigating through the pandemic. And then surely we also updated existing evaluation tools, for example, our student panel, where we are now looking also a bit more on the long-term effects on our students. And we plan to, for example, do also research on the consequences for the pandemic students, in how far maybe they're missing something, or in how far this has any effects on their study efforts, and maybe also dropouts, etc. Another thing we did at the University of Potsdam is to apply for the so-called peer-to-peer strategy consulting of the Hochschulforum Digitalisierung. The Hochschulforum Digitalisierung is a forum for universities in Germany on the topic of digitalization, as you might have guessed. And with this application, we are going currently still through this kind of peer assessment and peer consultation. The idea is to look at our structures and our strategies for digital teaching and digitalization, yes, to kind of make the best use of the pandemic experiences here. I just heard a sound, Tia. I'm not sure if I might be over time already.
No, you still have 1 minute. I didn't hear anything, so you can still go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yes, so given that I just have a minute left, let me go a bit into, yes, a kind of resume of the situation at the University of Potsdam. I think we saw that communication was key, and communication between the different actors at the units worked well between decentral and central units and the different stakeholders. And we were, I think, quite quick and happy to have well-established structures already in a robust quality management system in place. This was really helpful. I think the emergency underlined the need of evaluation as research. So not only having some kind of standard surveys, etc., but really the development of own questionnaires according to research methodologies and to get to know more about the cases. And I think very important was also the external, internal, and also international peer exchange. This was a bit more after the first months to get to know how other institutions reacted and to learn from their experiences. Also, this was a very important thing. And for example, also the focus group organized here by EUA, but also many other. If somebody would ask me what we would keep, I'm sure we would keep online workshops, videos, and media online, websites, etc. So there has been really a boost with these instruments, with these digital possibilities to offer training, to offer transfer, and discuss evaluation results with teachers and students. So it's really a low threshold way to reach people, and I think this will stay for sure. What we really have to continue is to look on teaching and learning, how it evolves now after the emergency remote teaching mode we were in. I'm really looking forward now to see, probably in the winter semester, we will be going back to presence. So this will be very interesting to see what will happen and how we can support this. Yes, so that's really the question. What form of teaching and learning and assessment do we want in the future? We are discussing this in this process at the moment with the peer-to-peer consultation, for example. And yeah, we are really looking into how QA can facilitate and support this. And yes, I think that's it from my side. I would have another slide, I think, but I guess I said what I wanted to say, Tia.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank. I know I'm putting pressure on you in time-wise. I see there are questions, but we can take them perhaps also later in the session and keep them coming. But you'd mentioned earlier in the presentation that your quality assurance system had just been accredited before the pandemic. Did the mode of operations in your internal quality assurance and in how you deliver teaching impact this accreditation in any way?
I would say rather not really. So at the university, we, given that we're institutionally accredited, we accredit our own study programs, and we have this process set up since some years. We are currently in the midst of reorganizing this and evaluating it, but it's not really because of the pandemic. This is more because of we have now accredited almost all our study programs, and now we are in the midst to re-accredit them. So we want to get a step further from the standard checking, let's say, also in that side, similarly to agencies nowadays. So the only thing is that we went, I think, to have the committee meetings online, and maybe that will even stay because it's a bit more comfortable for everyone. Instead of having all to be at one place, the people from the study programs can just join in for the very exact time, etc. And it's a bit more easier logistically.
Okay, thank you, Frank. I think we'll move on to our next case study, Aisling, because I think she will be talking a little bit about similar issues. So I'll give the floor to you, Aisling.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to move on. Good afternoon, everybody, and greetings from a rather wet, a rather windy, and a rather cold Dublin. It's wonderful to be here with you this afternoon, and from all over the globe. I see participants from everywhere, from Canada to Mozambique. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and I hope my case study can be of value to you. This is a particular one. Frank's presentation provided, I suppose, a wide angle lens view of a whole range of activities, which of course has taken place in universities right across the globe in order to manage the COVID crisis. The one that I offer today as a case study is quite specific, and it's about a review that was conducted during the COVID emergency, so during campus closures, which took a holistic approach to reviewing the quality of digital learning at my university, DCU. I offer it, I suppose, both as a case study of how internal quality assurance can enable a review of digital learning, which has obviously come to the fore as something so important during the COVID crisis, but also a little bit about the experience of conducting a full internal review of a key part of your university's delivery or their mission during the COVID process. To start off, I just wanted to introduce DCU, or Dublin City University. We were established as a higher education institution in 1980 and designated further as a university in 1989, as one of 4 now universities in the Dublin metropolitan area. We have 3 teaching campuses, a sports campus and an innovation campus, all within a kind of a 3-kilometre radius in the north of the city. And our community is made up of over 18,500 students and over 1,600 staff. And I mentioned the next 2 things given their relevance, I suppose, to looking at digital learning. For over 30 years, DCU has had a national profile in relation to the delivery of distance education, and a 30-year history when it was first established as a national distance education centre. Now, since 2014, that has largely meant distance learning within the online domain. And so therefore, we do have a long history of experience with digital and online learning. And indeed, since 2013, the university has been home to the National Institute for Digital Learning in Ireland, which is a dedicated research centre which deals with the research and pedagogical practice of blended online and digital models of education. So in talking about internal quality reviews, and in particular, the idea of doing a thematic quality review on a particular topic, our university took an approach which may be very familiar to you in terms of an internal quality reviews of areas within your university. That's one grounded and in a bedrock of critical reflection and self-assessment, followed by engagement with expert peer reviewers who will generally visit campus and review both the self-assessment and meet stakeholders in order to make a series of recommendations for quality improvement for a particular area, which is then followed by a quality improvement planning process and then the publications of the outputs of that process. But thematic reviews are slightly different for us in that they take an institutional-wide approach on specific, normally quite important topics for the university. They include many and multiple perspectives from those of academic staff, professional support staff, our student body, and even external stakeholders. They examine that particular theme from a range of perspectives, which include both strategic perspectives and operational aspects. And they tend to be led by a cross-institutional steering group. And this was how we structured this particular thematic review. So what were the questions that we asked ourselves within this review? I should point out to foreground it that this was a review that we had intended to conduct at DCU anyway. Our decision to do this review was not determined by COVID, but had actually been initiated just prior to COVID. However, COVID and the impact of it on teaching and learning and our overall operations greatly impacted the results of the review. But we asked ourselves a number of questions. To what extent were we as a university delivering on our strategic intent in relation to digital learning? How is and how can digital learning contribute to transforming learning, both formal and informal at DCU? To what extent are staff and students prepared to embrace digital approaches to learning, and have these been effective? How is our approach aligned with national and international best practice in relation to digital learning? And as a formative piece, and this is crucial to the culture of this review, what aspirations should the university have for digital learning over the next 5 years? I just want to touch very briefly on self-assessment, because I mentioned that I believe it to be the absolute bedrock of a good evaluation and the value for the process for the university, and some of the evidence that we used in order to inform that critical reflection. And these came from 3 sources: from survey feedback, both existing on digital learning more generally, but also on a COVID-specific context. We also conducted a series of focus groups, very varied of groups between staff and students. And we also conducted a benchmarking exercise. For this, there are a whole range of internationally recognized benchmarking exercises for digital learning, including some which have a European context. DCU chose to use the Australian A-Code benchmark for technology-enhanced learning for this purpose. I wanted to touch on the impact that COVID had on this particular review. And in truth, it influenced and impacted very much all the stages of the review process. During self-assessment, it was turned out to be a very valuable opportunity to collect feedback and evaluate for the university the quality of learning during the COVID pivot. Obviously, there was an immediacy of the COVID context for stakeholders, even though our research questions and our objectives didn't directly address the COVID context. It also allowed us to reflect quite critically on both our short-term response to the digital pivot, how we were planning to cope with the medium-term management of the COVID context, and also perhaps what the long-term impact could be. So it provided a useful lens through which we could do self-assessment. For the review visit, we had initially postponed the visit, hoping that by December 2020, COVID would be a thing of the past. This would all be over us. The virus would have burned itself out and we could have an on-campus review. But that wasn't to be at the time. So the review visit was held remotely, online using Zoom calls for both the stakeholder meetings and for the peer review team to consider their findings. And the stakeholder meetings often discussed the COVID context and the delivery of all of our mission in the current circumstances of distance working. In terms of the review outcomes, there was a commendation for the university in terms of our response, which was an important acknowledgement of the hard work that staff had committed to keeping the university going during the previous 9 months. And there were really useful recommendations, which we believe were focused on longer-term strategic frameworks for our future success. Improvement planning is currently ongoing. Again, that process has been slightly delayed as a result of priorities in relation to managing the COVID impact. And I just want to finish up, if I could, in terms of what we learned about going through both a digital learning review, but also internal reviews more generally. One of the things that was useful and we often joked about going through self-assessment was that we never expected to use digital learning technologies and tools in order to drive through and to facilitate an internal review process. And that was both interesting, but actually also a very positive experience for staff that this could be done in an online environment. There was strong engagement from both staff and students throughout self-assessment and the review visit, largely because digital learning and the technologies that support it were now such a crucial part of university activity. And we believe that the recommendations that we received from our peer review team of experts provide us with a really useful and important foundation for future enhancement, particularly in a post-COVID environment, which I think is crucially important for us. Now, more generally, in relation to conducting internal quality reviews in this current environment, there are implications and impacts for everyone involved. And that's in terms of being able to manage business as usual pressures, but also for the peer review teams in particular, and the challenge of them engaging. And I think what internal reviews at the moment have provided us with an opportunity to have long-term lessons about what we can learn from the COVID experience, technology and the systems to support our online activity, but as well as being an opportunity for us to acknowledge important issues around staff well-being and team cohesion in a remote working environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aisling. Based on this experience, do you think that you will continue with the remotely hosted peer reviews?
That's an interesting question. I think that there is a lot lost from the peer review process in hosting remote reviews. And we are careful in conducting each of our remote reviews to date that we receive feedback from the peer reviewers in particular. I think gelling as a team and being able to work effectively in a remote environment, Zoom fatigue is a huge thing. Plus also for a peer review team to be able to leave their physical environment and their own work environment to travel to Dublin, as many of them are pleased to be able to do, to join us at campus, and we are able to host them and give them weak coffee and many sandwiches throughout the peer review process. There is something lost for them in terms of the challenges that they face in being able to do their job. And with this in mind, while we will continue during the current health emergency to conduct remote reviews, we would anticipate going back to in-person campus reviews in order that I suppose that we can benefit from the richness of what happens when a peer review team get together and meet us and smell our campus and see our campus and get to meet the people and understand our context. So I think it's likely that we will move back to in-person reviews in time as that allows.
Well, I personally would love to visit Dublin one of these days. Let's hope it becomes possible soon. Thank you, Aisling. Now I would ask the participants a little question again via poll. What do you think about the presentations you have just heard? Considering your own institution's experience, do you relate to what they've said? Does it sound familiar? And you submit your answer and then you click on the polls, and soon under the close tab you will be able to see the results. I'm just waiting to see that the results are coming in, all of them, before we close it. Still 2 seconds and then we will close it. 1, 2, and now, colleagues, we can close it, and the participants will be also able to see it. 30% of you say yes, totally, sounds familiar, and 53% say yes, partially. I'm really happy only 2% say no. So this probably shows something about our shared experiences. And talking about the shared experiences, I would now ask Elena to come in and talk about what did we find the shared experiences to be. So we organized a little focus group, and you have the challenge of summarizing the rich discussions now in a couple of minutes. Frank, I saw you a second ago, so if I can ask you a question, because there was a specific question for Potsdam in the question and answer section about your internal, is the outcome of quality assurance public? How often is it undertaken in your institution? These accreditations you do with programs, I understand.
Yes, our internal accreditation, yes, the outcomes are public. They are on our website. We have so-called quality profiles, which are being published there, and then also the results of our committee's discussion, and I'm searching for the for the English words now. Well, usually you have conditional things, etc. So all these results are published online, and everybody can access them actually.
Good. And how often do you do this program accreditation internally?
It's now with the new regulations in Germany for 8 years actually. 8 years. They received accreditation. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Thank you, Elena.
Yes, it seems that I'm in now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, not a smooth entry, but yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tia, and a warm welcome to all of those who hear us. So indeed, I am going to present the findings of our focus group. So EUA in early February organized a focus group on internal quality assurance in times of COVID-19. And the aim of this event was to provide an opportunity for different practitioners in internal quality assurance to share experiences and practices that they've been put forward during this period. 39 participants were in this event from 20 different countries. And as a result, we published a report based on the findings of the focus group. As a starting point, following the principle for quality assurance in the EHEA that higher education institutions have the main responsibility for the quality of their provision and its assurance, it was and still is kind of natural that when the abrupt move to emergency remote teaching happened in spring, the questions related to quality assurance and the quality of provision were focused or directly directed towards higher education institutions mainly. The findings of the focus group, but not only, also other studies confirmed these findings, are that higher education institutions showed remarkable resilience and capacity to act swiftly, not only regarding their internal affairs, but also helping the society in the very difficult moments. From the discussions we had in the event, it emerged that two phases could be identified during the process. Namely, the first phase was an emergency one, when institutions had to transfer their learning and teaching and their services online in a matter of days in some cases. And this phase was strongly characterized by actions focused on managing the crisis, or how some participants put it, on extinguishing the fire. So that was the sentiment. While the following phase was focused on quality management and improvement. So during the autumn of 2020, the focus moved on checking and planning, because there was a strong need for information on the experiences gained during the emergency phase, and to inform and plan the semesters that were ahead, because it was quite obvious that the semesters will continue to be in online mode. Regarding the changes in internal quality assurance, we found that during 2020, the practices that internal quality assurance put in place remained fundamentally unchanged. But in many cases, their scope and focus was adapted and extended. The areas where changes and adaptations were made, you can see them on the slide, where policies and regulations with many guidance papers have been written during the period. Decision-making working structures have been changed, where certain groups were put together, groups that were focused on managing specific questions related to the crisis, monitoring and evaluating. Almost all the instruments for monitoring were adapted with questions related to the crisis. Then teaching and learning and assessment, and training and support to teaching staff and students. Challenges addressed through these changes were mainly related to the transition to online mode of delivery, to which not all institutions were prepared, but even those institutions that were prepared encountered still challenges. Then the urgent need for capacity building, as neither the teaching staff nor the students had the needed skills and knowledge about online teaching and learning. Safeguarding inclusion and equity was also high on the agenda, with consideration to lack or poor internet connection that hindered both students and academic staff to be actively involved. Shortage of gadgets as well was one factor, and other problems were there as well. Student assessment and ensuring data protection. Digital assessment increased exponentially during this period, and therefore institutions had to find new ways to ensure data protection and academic integrity. Internal mobility was also affected due to very well-known reasons, and well-being of both students and staff. In many cases, students and staff were overwhelmed by this situation, and institutions had to offer support and help. The key success factors identified through the focus group discussions were largely related to institutional autonomy, flexibility of institutional decision-making, quality culture, willingness of staff to innovate and experiment, collaboration, and communication. And when thinking about moving forward, we need to consider that the pandemic has prompted indeed a major boost to the digitalization of higher education institutions. It has also revealed its potential and its benefits, but also its shortcomings. And when thinking about future higher education institutions should take full advantage of digitalization of learning and teaching and of quality assurance procedures, but in this regard, they should learn about from the lessons learned from this experience, retain the good practices that were established. And we see from the examples of Aisling and Frank that this is going to happen, and discuss the long-term perspectives to prepare for the future. Already now is the time to plan ahead. Quality assurance should contribute to these reflections by providing evidence of what works and what needs to be improved, also to address issues relevant for online learning. And as the typical internal quality assurance enhancement cycle proved to be a bit slow to react in times of crisis, further reflection on allowing for a swifter feedback loop and more timely reactions should also take place. And with this, I want to end my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Elena. How easy would you say it was to summarize the discussions of the focus group?
I would say it was easy because the challenges they faced were very similar, and in many instances, the mechanisms they came up with to solve those challenges were quite similar. Of course, there were differences, mainly because the sizes of institutions differed, the governance model differed, their autonomy level also differed, and disciplines as well. So these factors influenced their differences, but there were a lot of similarities we could draw from the discussions and from the experiences shared.
All right, thank you. Let's pick on the participants' brains again. When looking forward, what do you think? We have another poll coming up. If we can see it, yes. What are the priorities for the internal quality assurance at your institution for the post-COVID-19 period? I think we already asked our participants, our panelists, a little bit of what they said a few things that they think is going to happen in their institution. While we're waiting for the responses to come in, perhaps we can take away the slideshow, and I would ask all the panelists to join me on screen. I see some people are still responding. Well, I think we have all the responses, so we can close the poll. And 8% only thinks that you are going to continue with the pre-COVID-19 QA practices, whereas 78% say that you will maintain some new quality assurance practices introduced during the past year. Does this surprise you? For instance, Aisling?
In a way, no, because I feel some of the changes to our processes and procedures are specific to deal with the emergency that is managing the COVID crisis. As we know, when we develop even policies and procedures, there is in the implementation of those the need for them to trickle down into the culture of our organization under normal terms and under normal conditions. But I do think that what we want out of our quality assurance processes is not about dealing with an emergency. It's about absolute best practice. And whether that best practice and effectiveness and richness from a quality assurance procedure comes from those that have been developed in response to an emergency. Perhaps they can inform particularly efficiencies. But certainly for ourselves, that richness will come in well-established cultures, processes, and procedures that are well understood and valued by the institution.
Okay. The most voted question among those that you have posed in the audience from the audience is the question that what quality assurance standards are used at European level to assess online teaching and learning? I think I can answer this quite quickly. We don't have European level quality standards for online teaching and learning. We do have some suggestions for how to do quality assurance of online teaching and learning. And for instance, in the handout sections, you will be able to find a report prepared by our partners among the European quality assurance agencies. ENQA's report is available there. And I see that our colleague from that works on the online learning and teaching, especially Alison, posted in the chat some suggestions for self-assessment methods. But when it comes to quality standards, we don't have those. But then the second question is, how do you integrate quality criteria for the use of technology in teaching and learning into your overall quality assurance? And this is where I would turn to Frank.
Yes, thank you for that question, and I think it connects to other questions also, which are in the Q&A. Just generally, and it's similar also with the question of ESG, are they good enough still or not? No, I think most of our policies and standards, etc., are kind of so general that they also work for the digital learning space. And I would see that the integration is more really on the evaluation part, that you're looking more on specific things like maybe also the social integration, for example, surely the technical aspects, digital inequality, and such things. So, but other than that, generally good teaching is good teaching still. And I think the pandemic gave us kind of a boost in certain things to bring them to a wider audience, because there was so much talk about teaching and learning. And that's something we have to preserve, I think, and to be dialogue oriented there.
Yeah, we do have quite a few questions that deal with this, that how is this internal quality assurance of digital learning, is it different, fundamentally different from assuring other kind of learning or teaching? Aisling, do you have any views on this?
Not really. It's kind of outside of my area of expertise. I think one of the things that we found and have discussed greatly during our digital learning thematic review was that if it hadn't been for COVID, we would still be having very many conversations about trying to encourage the adoption of digital and online technologies to enhance the teaching experience. And that debate and dialogue changed over one weekend. And so the dialogue now about quality is not about digital resources or digital platforms or digital technologies, although that is still important. It's about appropriate pedagogies, about collaboration and engagement within a digital space, and how for, as educators, our academic staff can most effectively engage with the technologies that they are now incredibly comfortable with, but to create a high quality learning environment. And then in the longer term, how those digital technologies can be most appropriately applied in a blended environment in order to create a much richer student experience for the long-term future.
Yeah. Similarly, I would say that, you know, just moving from the technicalities and to really discussing the topic, what is good teaching, I think there is a question that deals with the assessment, which is another area that we are probably talking more about. And I think, Frank, you mentioned it as well. There is a question about, have you considered institutionally the approach to assessment and the move away from exam-based assessment? Have you seen that there would have been a more fundamental discussion about assessment thanks to the COVID-19 than we would have had otherwise? Frank.
Me, okay. Thank you for the question. I think yes, and that's the big opportunity now. I'm really curious to see how it will evolve. But we have seen with the possibility of not being able to do so many exams in presence anymore. So we have seen this new emergence of open book exams, etc., and also more discussion on like formative assessment, etc. But it's a difficult area because there's also a lot of ministerial policies, etc. So universities are not totally free in doing what they want in that area. But I think there is movement, and there is hopefully really, I mean, we have been working on that also before. It's not like it's a new topic to change assessment. But I think there has been some movement there, and I'm quite, I feel confident that there will be more coming.
Helena.
Yes, if I may add, in the focus group discussions, it was obvious that this is a hot topic in all the institutions. And it was noted that many other assessment tools have been put forward than before, and academic staff or teaching staff have been tried out many other techniques than before, and also the frequency of evaluations changed, which hasn't had happened before, and I think this was an effect of the crisis as well.
Aisling.
Yeah, I just wanted to take off my quality assurance hat and put on my statistical analysis hat as an institutional researcher and say that the externalities which are caused by these different modes of assessment and how they impact on student grades and being able to understand and mark students and being able to recognize differences in achievement, I think will be a fascinating topic for myself for analysis over the next while. I think that we have focused on analysing, or certainly I have, on whether pass rates or failure rates in individual classes and programmes have remained stable or changed as a result of the COVID crisis. But it's been hard for me currently to look at whether or not the differences in assessment have caused changes to grading patterns and how we tell between the highest achieving students and those who may be a little bit lower. Because I think an environment where there are more assessments, potentially more group assessments, and many more continuous assessments throughout the year end up with a regression towards a mean, which means that more and more students within a class will be achieving results which are very similar to each other. And I think that's interesting and an interesting challenge for us in terms of assessment to not only consider the impact of changes in assessment to what a student achieves in terms of their marks and grades, but how we're able to differentiate between students. And certainly that'll be a very interesting piece of analysis for me to do in the next little while.
This is what we learned in the focus group, is that many universities are at the moment starting this kind of analysis and trying to see the impact. It will be interesting after a while to see the results and whether we learn anything from them. There was talk about the support to the staff in this move to digital provision. We do have a question that talks about what about the staff that it doesn't want the support and still can't cope with these digital tools. Did this come up in Elena in the focus group?
Yes, it was a topic that received quite a lot of attention from the focus group participants. And there were some interesting ideas that were shared. For example, when students got very much involved in, so to say, training their teachers in how to use the different tools, different platforms, and even jumped in giving feedback and proposing some other tools to be used, and so on and so forth. And many teaching staff members that were not willing before to go for such trainings opened up and actually were very active in going for these training opportunities.
Frank, you said that your staff was quite eager, was it?
Well, I would still say there is room for improvement and room for more. But yeah, I mean, people had to do digital teaching, online teaching. So, I mean, those who were not so prepared, they had to ask for help. And I think if we look at our evaluations, most of them actually helped themselves in their faculty, in their departments, so on a peer level. That was, I think, the most used help there. Yeah, but the good thing is, and also looking at again at our evaluation results, that given that they had this experience now, you know, this wall has gone somehow, and really we see that the teachers are more likely to use digital online learning formats in the future also. So it definitely has helped with this kind of disruption we had.
So we've made the digi-leap as a result of the past year. Aisling, anything urgent that you still want to say and add for our participants?
Not really. I know we're almost out of time. For students as well, there is a digital gap in terms of development. And I think that we have had a lot of feedback around just because students are good at using social media doesn't mean that they have a natural aptitude for the range of digital tools which are there to support their learning. So that while staff development is obviously crucial, so is the notion of digital literacies and development on digital technologies for students too.
I think this is what we learned, yes, indeed. In the focus group, there was a lot of talk about students. I do have to say that. Actually, surprisingly, a lot talk about students, whether their capacity to adapt to a new situation, but also the well-being that Frank referred to, that you are going to look into in Potsdam in the next stages. Okay, we've spent our hour. I would like to thank our participants and more importantly, the panelists. It's been a fascinating sneak peek to what's going on in the universities, but we've only scratched the surface here, let's be honest, and we do hope that the discussion continues. Certainly the discussion continues in the EUA webinars on different topics, and on screen you can now see some of the topics we will be dealing with in the next weeks. But I would really highlight the fact that the call for contributions for European Quality Assurance Forum, which will take place in November, is currently open. So we are looking for contributions. If you have experiences or research to share with us, please do submit something and contribute to the conversation, because I am certain it will continue in autumn, if not already before that. So once again, Aisling, Elena and Frank, thank you very much for taking the time to share your experience here today. And I do hope that we get to see each other in person soon again. And all that's left for me to say at the moment is have a nice afternoon, everyone, and see you soon again.